Welcome everyone. That's the first time I'm speaking here in a big conference room like that. And usually I do prefer people, crowded in the corridors, laying on the floor, fighting for the space. Here I think we won't face this issue. So thank you, Grzegorz, because he did it because of you. Usually you expected to have the space. So today I will talk about awesomeness. It's good actually that I didn't need to use Polish equivalent because it would be probably a dirty word. So let me tell you the perspective here. So I myself started playing with the software when I was 6 years old. So that's 35 years ago or more. And for many years I've been into technologies as a developer, as a project manager, leader. And more than 10 years ago, I co-founded a company. Nowadays, it's more than 150 people, so not a small thing anymore. And I must admit, about 5 years ago, I practically stopped coding, like in the nights, maybe, or during hackathons. But I cannot call myself anymore a developer by profession. And now, with the changing perspective, I see how big the gap is between the business or the bosses working in the business space who decide about your salaries, about your success, and engineers themselves. So I thought that before I forgot, and I will become one more boss who doesn't care about engineers. Hopefully it will never happen, but who knows. Life is brutal. I would like to share with you this perspective so both sides can be closer and be more effective. So probably you may know me from quite some famous or infamous presentations for the last several years. Some of them had gathered thousands or tens of thousands of views. Still, this is a continuation showing how I evolve and my thoughts evolve. So let's quickly start with decomposing the subject of this talk, which is quite a long one. So we have three main pieces there. Modern software development. I mean, awesomeness is obvious, but we have a modern software development company. I would like to define it quickly, boss and customer, and finally impress. So let me quickly decompose it. So for me, a modern software development company is a company operating really in a highly competitive environment. Fast changing, reacting to feedback, building feedback loops, constantly improving. Usually it's done, I mean, this is the only way which I can see in 21st century, by creating autonomous teams, fully empowered, leveraging creative people who may have great individual impact, decentralizing decision-making processes and responsibilities, and applying lightweight processes. So note that I haven't said here a word about any technology, including Java. By the way, probably Java is going to be used only once, here or twice. I have just done it. So don't expect any more this word here. It can be PHP, like Facebook did. It could be, Ruby, Java and Scala, like Twitter, whatever. Really, technology doesn't matter if these things matter. Then about the boss and how these companies look in practice. So in old world, which is current world for many of us still, we had usually multiple layers of teams or people shielding us or protecting us from users or customers. We had a team that was, me here, that was our boss, maybe a team lead. There were various representatives of the company talking closer to the customers, like key account managers, sales folks, support folks, product owners, and so on. Usually some customer representative who was shielding, in fact, users. And in this situation, boss was channeled all the communication and was distributing the information accordingly. However, in new world, where fast feedback loops are necessary to react and adapt, we are in a more like a complete graph setup where everyone speaks to everyone. And suddenly, myself is very close to customer, to the users, to the reps, to the customer representatives, to our people who are dealing with customers. We have everyone talking to everyone. And suddenly, then there is not much difference between the boss and the customer. And actually, It's not the boss who pays our bill, our salary, but the customer actually. So it's not that bad to listen to customer as strongly as to listen to your boss. So by this, I just cheated on you and really decided that boss equals customer, so I will concentrate just on one. And impress. Impress is not about liking someone, personal taste, doing some tricks, jokes. It's about the output. And in the modern software companies, impressing means constantly deliver greater and greater stuff. The stuff is usually a high-quality product or service. Okay, so what I'm not talking about here is about, for me, a modern software development company is not the company which just uses people, engineers, or whoever it is, as kind of batteries, like in Matrix, to run the company without their full involvement and full responsibility. So if you are in this company, maybe you won't understand what I'm talking about, but I'm assuming you are not. And for me, people are never resources. Resources are easily replicated, can be multiplied, can be scaled by duplicating them. People cannot be scaled in this way, and that's the whole fun for me as a boss. Okay, so now we have these modern organizations which want to address the super fast changing environment by creating this full set of communication channels. The problem is that it doesn't scale really. Those of you who know graph theory, number of edges in the complete graph is proportional to the grows quadratically. And very quickly, with 10, 20, 30 people talking to each to everyone, it becomes a mess. No one knows what's going on. So this was faced by many companies, including ours. Even with the size of 150, we do have this issue. Smarter guys than myself. Former Google CEO and executive chairman, Eric Schmidt, said that smart creatives, the term coined by him and popularized in the book How Google Works. By the way, I highly recommend reading this book. It's about the empowerment, about culture, about hiring as well. So very good book. So a few years ago, he coined this term smart creatives. And for him, these were the pillars to allow companies scale without facing these messiness issues. Why? Because it allows partitioning of the company into smaller parallel streams without very little coupling. So very similar to what we are facing in, say, microservice architectures or scalable systems when we are looking for the way how to scale our system by partitioning. And suddenly the same problems, the same scaling issues apply to companies as well. But even they are magnified because with the computer, communication can be super fast. It can be nanoseconds or milliseconds to request, send request, process response, and act. Well, for people, anyone involved in the communication channels, it's measured at least in minutes, if not in hours or days, especially if you are facing any geographical differences, time zone differences. For Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg, by the way, was a senior vice president of the product development at Google. These smart creatives were the next generation of knowledge worker. And knowledge worker is an old term from, I think, 60s, introduced by the famous writer Peter Drucker, who defined in the Industrial Revolution that a knowledge worker is the next step from a factory into a person who works mostly with their minds, not hands, and follows rigid processes and so on. So smart creative is not a knowledge worker, it's the next stage of knowledge worker. And let's quickly look at who smart creative is, or what traits she or he has. So tons of traits. I would say it's almost like an ungodly creature. From being a person hands-on with deep technical knowledge, very detailed, great with communication, creative, funny, or even charismatic, business savvy, so really good at understanding the business. At the same time, bored easily and shifting jobs a lot, so that may ring a bell. Analytically smart, obviously passionate, smart about the users. So he's himself represents a user. He understands full users. He's like a power user. He is often part of the community of users. He has a lot of initiative. He doesn't require direction, giving direction. He's self-directed. He's not afraid of taking risks. He's curious. And he's able and willing to fiercely disagree with anyone, including the person who's in power to fire or promote someone. He's fully open. And then we have two things which are environmental here. So this person thrives or requires a not confined environment. So the task, role, given job title, given org structure, or concrete working hours doesn't matter for this person. And that person doesn't like to be limited to access to any information or resources in the company, like, for example, computing resources or access to some systems. In fact, but in return, he's open or she is open. She doesn't confine any access to anyone from the information or outcome of the work this person does. And this person is full of creative energy, and multidimensional means like thinking not just about, say, technology, but on many aspects. And these were the traits specified by Google folks in the book itself, so that's a lot. And according to them, not every one of them are necessary, but these in bold font are definitely a must-haves, and without them, there is no chance a person can be a smart creative. And note that hands-on and deep technical knowledge are here, so it's not about, being a boss who knows how to just manage or delegate. It's about really being able to get hands dirty, pull up sleeves, and do the work with full understanding what it means. Okay, so it looks like these creatures are like unicorns. So it's a theory. Can we find such people, or do such people exist? And in fact, there is strong belief, and I know it. I have such people in my company, that smart creatives are everywhere. And actually, it's even better, because the world we are living in, the world which quickly changes, the world where the societies become less and less rigid, we have more and more open access to information, to education. There are fewer sacred cows we cannot challenge. We have less borders, limitations, and more easier direct feedback loops, for example, from our users, from customers, thanks to internet. Then this environment lets smart creatives thrive and grow. And the more such situation we have, the more smart creatives arrive. People are not born; they become in such environment smart creatives if they have some good traits, and I will be talking about these traits. So let's quickly take a look at what drives smart creatives. Number one, things are about learning new things. It's about achieving some important things which do matter. It's about solving some problems, interesting problems, ideally, and having an interesting general life, where and having interesting people around, because it also makes like this person is interesting by themselves, is creative, is full of energy, and the environment, interesting environment, lets this person be even more creative. What doesn't drive, really? Compensation only. Compensation comes second. These people don't bother about company mission or vision. That's for them, doesn't really matter. Stability, like really focusing on whether I can work in a given company or a team for years, doesn't really matter. And perks like, a car, or maybe educational, like the English lessons or whatever it is, a conference, it's a minor thing. Obviously, it's okay, but it never is a focus of their attention. So let's take a look at what the data says now. This was what the book says, and now let's take a look at what data says. So HackerRank published just a couple of weeks ago an interesting report about about people who use this site, and this is the site used for solving online coding tests, for example, or various competitions, and many companies use it, for example, to process candidates in early stages. So HackerRank shared it publicly, and about 40,000 people, all of them were developers or knew how to deal with the programming, answered what for them is most important when they are looking for a new job. And as you can see, compensation here comes on the third place, really, but let's say first 6 elements are pretty much similarly important, with company mission being very, very high to the bottom, perks, valuation, stability doesn't really matter. What matters are things like growth, learning, smart people and team around. That's also important. And it really contributes to learning. Interesting problems to solve, compensation necessary, obviously, and good work-life balance, which is also a very interesting thing. I will quickly cover that in a sec. In Poland, this was for the 40,000 people from across the world. In Poland, it looks quite different. but not that much. So the first 5 are pretty much still first 5. Note that in Poland, compensation somehow is less important. I haven't seen that as a boss in our company, but yes. Maybe people are afraid of openly admitting that. But definitely what is even more important is smart people, interesting problems to solve, good work-life balance is still, here is number 2nd, and professional growth and learning. So super important things. In Poland, company mission is even less important, and I guess it's because as a former communist country where for years we are accustomed to hearing bullshit, we treat this stuff as bullshit, and we are pretty much bullshit proof, so it doesn't matter. Also, in a lot of companies, really, whatever they put in writing, people don't care on daily basis. Doesn't impact their job, so it really doesn't matter. Then the concrete projects, the concrete challenge the given person responsible for. With work-life balance, note there is a difference here, very high. I mean, number 1 in Poland, less important, really. And I learned as a person who hires people from 14 right now countries, that we are quite happy in Poland because the majority of us can enjoy 40 or 40-ish hours per week work week. Whereas in many countries, especially in India, that's not the case. People often work there 70, 80 hours per year. Holidays in States, for example, are not granted. It's a perk that you can have a day off, and usually it's a perk which is optional, so you are given a day off, but if you take them, that's may not necessarily be seen as the great thing. In Poland, it's not that bad. So because whole results were obviously skewed or biased by people from other countries, that's for sure where good work-life balance came so high. Also, nice, interesting thing, if you look at the distribution between younger folks, so-called millennials, it's where for these folks, ideally job becomes their hobby. I mean, that's the best thing. And in this case, work-life balance means often working on a job which is your hobby, and then you everything you spend in your job is great work-life balance. So that's also great. Okay, so that was the stats. Apparently in Poland and in the world, there is a desire for learning, there is a desire for bigger impact, for the growth. So how we can find such people if we are looking for them, or how we can become a smart creative. Maybe we are already. And here I will quickly share with you a couple of slides in green. I will be sharing some questions which at Spartans we are using at the various interviews, usually at the later stages, trying to probe if people have these traits. And I'm not afraid of sharing these questions with you, even if some of you may, in the future apply to Spartans, because it's not about knowing the question, really. It's about understanding the answer and acting according to the answer. So a few slides will follow in next 30 minutes, a couple of them with the questions, trying to address how to find such people. Okay, let's go back to the traits. So there are several key traits which allow or which cause forming of a smart creative. Let me start with the first one. Does anyone know what IJP or RBP mean? Which are TLA, so 3-letter acronyms, famous in the US, TLA, 3-letter acronym. Anyone knows what IHP or RBP stand for? So IHP is intellectual horsepower, so like, in a car, very frequently used by Americans, Indians, and in Anglo-Saxon culture. RBP is a raw brain power. Similar, the same. One is probably more in automotive type of thinking about the person, horsepower, and the other is about maybe more biological. Anyway, it's a number one thing which contributes to making one smart creative. And now why? You've probably seen this chart many times. This is the history of the humankind, and this is where we are now. So for hundreds and thousands of years, we were advancing in a relatively, with a slow acceleration. From the first achievement by ancient Egyptians, Greeks, then the press, Isaac Newton and so on. And 19th and 20th century, this is where we become accelerating. And many futurists believe that we are almost facing now the wall. This is this hockey curve, and we are around only at the bottom of this hockey curve. And we'll see the exponential growth. And with this exponential growth, intelligence is super important. Why? Because high intelligence is, according to the scientists, is the number one way to deal with exponential changes. With the linear changes, it's okay, inertia will help, but with an exponential changes, high level of intelligence is number one to deal with that and adapt. But this was, this is more or less a bullshit. Someone drew some person, a wall. Look at the data. Look at, for example, famous Moore law, one of the founders of Intel, in practice and the processors. So from 70 to 2016, so without 2 last years, you can see this is logarithmic scale, how the growth was going of the processors in terms of the number of transistors. It's only 36 years here, so less than I live. And from 2,000 transistors to 20 billion transistors in 30 years. I will show in a moment what it really means. And I do remember having a great processor called MOS 6502. Anyone knows what the processor was used there? Where this processor was used? Atari 65 and 130. It was exactly 3,510 transistors. It used also, by the way, in Apple I and II. Not that long ago. Many of you remember that time. Then another famous processor, Motorola 68,000. Does anyone know? Amiga, exactly. Amiga. This was used in Amiga and Atari ST. By the way, anyone has any idea how many transistors did this processor have? Any guesses? 68,000, exactly. The name was following the number of processors, so it had exactly 68,000 transistors, sorry. And now this goes exponentially very quickly. Let's look at what it means in practice. The same scale and put really animals or human being here. So in 2000, we were not yet reaching the size of the one insect brain. Now we exceeded already or around to animals like mouse. Soon, because the last 36 years, let us believe it won't stop. Soon we'll exceed the capability of human brain, and in 2060, all human brains together. That's scary for me. I don't know what to do with that, honestly, but I hope I will figure it out on the way. So, going back to intellectual horsepower. So, it does matter a lot, because some threshold has to be achieved to be successful. Some of this stuff is conceivable only by a person with very, very high intelligence, like Einstein or Hawking. Raw intellectual power is a good starting point for any exponential thinker, a person who has to deal with exponential change. But also, it's very important, high intellectual horsepower may be dangerous. Why? Because it makes us lazy. It makes us lazy because pretty easily, as a person, teenager, or as a young employee, for example, young professional, without much effort, we can quickly achieve a lot, or at least have moderate success. Also, I will always repeat it when I'm in Poland, speaking in Poland, remember about it. This is already proven by scientists, neurobiological scientists, that being negative, and in Poland, being negative is part of the pose a lot of engineers apply. Just, this is sexy to be negative, to whine, to whinge, to criticize, not constructively. And it was proven that being negative about something destroys your brain. And destroys, really, damages physically, damages in the long term the brain of people around you. So, on the other side, positive emotions, positive influence, positive signals are key for learning and creative thinking. Generally, being happy broadens whole thought process and brings more of our capacity online. So these are facts from last 20 years, 25 years. So in our case, it's like, you can be a fly and see shit everywhere and complain, or you can be a bee and see flowers everywhere, or you can perceive a glass half empty as a threat, or Jesus, the glass is already half empty, whereas a positive thinking about the same would be, wow, we can now do something and really we have opportunity to fill it again. So again, for me, whenever I'm talking to a Polish audience or Central European audience, because it's not only Polish scene, the same applies for most of our Central European colleagues, be less about no and about bad, so less disagree, less say always, but it doesn't work because or bad, but be more about yes and to amplify what you are talking about. Generally more about the brain plasticity, so how neural cells can be connected while you get older, so it's not only when you are born, but when you get older. More about it in this great book by Andy Hunt. He's, by the way, an engineer who wrote in a very, very engineering, scientific way things he learned about the brain. Highly recommend this book. But I was talking to you about an intelligence, and you may believe, hey, I need to be an Einstein or other genius to be a smart, creative. It's not for me. I'm not an Einstein, obviously. But honestly, the older I become, the more I believe, seeing the evidence that intelligence alone is overrated. Only intelligence without any other things won't help you at all. It's definitely overrated. In fact, what I have learned painfully, because I considered myself to be quite intelligent and talented as a kid, and I suffered from the syndrome of being lazy, obviously, that success is 10% of talent and 90% of the hard work. There is a nice quote from, actually popularized by Kevin Durant. I think you know him. He won twice with his team NBA in last year and this year as the best player. So he popularized the quote from his trainer. Tim Notke was his trainer in high school, that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So think about it, like talent is great. If both of them don't work, talent wins. But always, always, hard work will beat talent if talent is not working. I'm into tennis as a guy. Let me prove it what it means in nowadays terms. Łukasz Kubot, you probably know him. The guy who was #1 in early 2018 after 20 years of being in tennis. I happen to have a tennis trainer who used to play in the same tennis school with Łukasz. Łukasz was then, Kubot, 22, 23 maybe. So every teenagers at that time, 18 years old or 19 years old, after 2-3 hours of training, were having beers, were joking and so on. Łukasz was the guy who was taking notes, talking to the trainer, reviewing videos, and for 20 years was working on improving himself, and guess what? He succeeded. It took him 20 years. He wasn't that talented like Roger Federer was, maybe, but ultimately by hard work and working on his talent, he succeeded. Which moves us to the missing component, which I mentioned, that the intelligence alone is overrated. So intelligence with constant learning is then become crucial. So this is the other thing missing in the puzzle. With learning, it's great that this actually helps you avoid aging, really. So Henry Ford, you probably know him from cars, manufacturing, and so on. He said really that this famous quote that the greatest thing in life is to keep your mind young. And many people, old people who are really active, who still learn, are really brilliant and keep their mind young. And there is a new thing about learning, which is putting learning to the next step. A few years ago, Carol Dweck, in her book, Mindset, the New Psychology of Success, coined the term growth mindset. And this is another step in learning. So with fixed mindset, people with fixed mindset believe that they were born, they developed themselves into some stage, and it's fixed. Their capabilities are fixed, their boundaries are fixed, and they operate to maximize their performance in the confined situation. People with growth mindset believe and have firm reasons to believe they can alter their own qualities, their capabilities, really biological capabilities of their brain. They can change oneself, they can adapt, and the more they are forced to adapt by the environment, the better results are. And they are not that focused about concrete performance goals, they are focused about learning goals, learning new things. So growth mindset is really learning which has permanent effect of oneself. It really does physically, as was proven, has been proven many times by the scientists really examining the brains, has permanent effects on oneself and permanently increases the capability of one person. It's a great thing that Agile environment, we are lucky to embrace first in the whole world as engineers, is super friendly for such setup. It's a super friendly setup for growth mindset, for cultivating that. Also, growth mindset is a perfect stance together with intelligence in the exponentially changing world. And key thing here is openness. So without openness for feedback, learning is not that useful really, because only feedback from learning let us internalize the lessons learned really. And obviously, the growth mindset requires flexibility and adaptability. And with person in this growth mindset, there is nothing like being overqualified to do something. Why put these two images? That's a real story from an operator of a digger who once, a couple of years ago, was digging stuff in my plot, on my garden, actually with this even digger. And he was really fighting with some small, tiny hole because his stuff was too big, really, to dig something smaller. And I proposed, hey, but you have a shovel. Just take shovel, it's 30 seconds, you'll do it. And he said, I'm not authorized to operate a shovel. So that's what I mean by being not hands-on person. You say, I'm not authorized. Now it was a joke, but actually many cultures have this thing ingrained in their culture. We have an employee with whom I had a problem. He was a support engineer, and he faced multiple times customers asking about the same things which were not documented. And he could have documented it in our public website facing customers, and by this would lower the number of requests really and make the life of the customers easier, but he did not. And I asked him, why you haven't done it? Didn't you think about it? And he said, of course I was thinking about it, but I'm not authorized by my job description to change public documentation. But I said, but you have access rights. Hey, I'm coming from Asia. There they would fire me if I did it. I'm not really authorized. So there are cultures, environments where this is not that obvious, like for you because you laughed. Okay, more about the growth mindset. Growth mindset is this kind of behavior where when we believe that learning is our goal, not the performance itself, and the effort, working hard on it makes me stronger, then really we spend more and more time working hard on the goal, and the effect are higher achievements really. So two things have to happen really. First of all, we believe we can make ourselves stronger because of that, and we put extra time and effort. What it means in practice really, when you apply some control groups, I mean really scientific approach, have a control group which was given prize of resilience. I mean, you had two groups. Scientists did a test. Two groups. One group was prized for high intelligence. Just try one more time. So they tried. There was a failure. They were prized for intelligence. Try one more time. And the others were prized for big effort. And the other group, guess what, was far more successful and they improved. So remember, when you have kids or employees maybe, always remember that prizing for hard work, not for talent, is a way to go. Because talent, is something inborn. It's difficult to prize someone because he's talented or she's talented. But if you prize for working hard on improvement, that matters. So these were studies about kids. The question is, can it work for adults? And really, again, tennis example, Roger Federer, the best player ever, he was quite miserable with serve. And he was 33 or 4 when he learned finally how to serve. After 30 years of playing game. So he has other adjustments to his game, really. I mean, obviously he's talented, but he can do that. And I know plenty of developers, for instance, who are 50 years old or even older, who know still how to adjust, how to learn new things. Okay, so a few ideas how to test learning habits, how we do it at Spartans. So obviously, like a cliche question is like, what have you learned in your current job, for example, or what do you hope to learn? But this is often raising a brow of many candidates is what do you do to stay up today, to be up to date with the new technologies? What do you decide? How do you decide what to learn and what to skip, really? What and how you have learned recently? What did you learn last month? And that's a question which often, wow, last month I didn't really learn anything. What did you learn last week? And that's a question which a couple of executives in the US use. And this one is used by Elon Musk. What have you learned today? If you cannot answer, think about your learning habits. The growth mindset is more difficult. These are often meta questions. It's like about, for example, this one. What big trends did you miss in the recent past? What did you really get right? What did you predict well, and what did you didn't? Maybe what questions you have about this job? What challenges you expect here? And how do you plan to overcome them? And finally, how do you measure yourself? How do you know that you are getting better? Otherwise, if you don't have this feedback loop, you are blind. Lou Adler, one of the best-selling authors around hiring, says that good people always ask good questions. So for them, at the interview, letting people ask questions is often better than asking people themselves. A note about senior engineers. So for me, over years, I realized that being senior is most about impacting others, really, and growing others in your company. It's about, like, number one job is build the environment in the company, so together with younger, less experienced people, we can fail fast, we can learn, we set quick feedback loop. It's about, also the job is about teaching and mentoring others, and setting great example by constant learning and improving themselves, by themselves. So obviously, if a senior engineer just says you have to learn, but he doesn't or she doesn't learn, it's a failed example. And also, senior engineers should ask their people around hard questions which trigger learning. And what senior role is not about is definitely not about linear stuff. It's not about doing more or faster the same stuff. And this is not that obvious to many people. I recently interviewed a principal architect I asked him, what makes you principal? That's also my favorite question, or what makes you senior according to you? And he said, I do 45 issues per week. And I couldn't understand. Could you repeat? Yeah, we have Jira, and I'm given 45 issues per week, and I'm doing 45, I'm a chief architect. If I was doing 40, I would be just architect. 30 senior, 25 mid-level guy. And it, by the way, turned out that he is not even able to run the system doing 45 tasks per week, but still a lot of people are in this mindset. So how to probe learning and teaching? For example, one of the questions I've recently started asking, what new could you teach me? And then do it, you have 3 minutes. Teach me something new, it also will show you your communication skills. Also, how did you change the way you work in recently, or in last 1-2 years? And then the follow-up questions. What do you now do differently, and now, and why? And finally, have you impacted people around? How they changed because of you? Next thing is experience, the next important factor which allows to create smart creative. So some people believe that years of experience matter. I don't believe. I think that the quality of environment someone has been working in is far more important. So years of experience are less meaningful than the environment. For example, just imagine a player in the 3rd league of Polish soccer versus Premiership League or a Spanish league or Bundesliga. People grow way, way faster around great people about them. Or take the Polish baseball league versus American baseball. Like the best Polish baseball player probably wouldn't even qualify to 3rd league of baseball in America. Just the focus on the sport, intensity is so higher. Experience, obviously, in the right environment increases self-awareness and maturity. That helps, and maturity and self-awareness are necessary ingredients to become senior person, definitely. But also, a lot of people forget, that it's better to be really the worst person, the least knowledgeable, the least mature person in a group than the strongest. Usually people become like level up or become or follow the average often. So if you are the best, it's a chance that over time you will deteriorate as a person. If you are the weakest person, it's guaranteed that you will level up very quickly. Actually, one of the sayings we had in Polish that it's better to be the last person in the city than the first person in the village. It's not about villagers. I will live in the village by myself, but I mean about the opportunities you have and challenges you face in the city with thousands or 100,000 or millions of people, versus a village of 20 people where being the best doesn't mean that much. So that's the conclusion, really, and I've seen it from many interviews, really, and believe me, over the last 10 years, we've interviewed tens of thousands of people, or processed, at least interviews probably less than that, but still thousands of people. And I often seen that people coming from fast-pacing environments are more often qualified, they are closer to the perfect description of the perfect employee than a person with, say, 10 years or 20 years in a very slow-pacing environment and not demanding. Okay, so how to test this experience or environment? I'm asking questions like, what is your top professional achievement? And why did you pick this achievement as the top? And a reflection. What would you do differently if you had been given a chance to go back in time and adjust? Or what is your top strength? And obviously, that's easy to answer, but tell me the case when it showed, really, when this top strength was applied. And or describe software development lifecycle you found which works best for you. The best part is what are the weakest points of this software development lifecycle? And then, how would you improve it? Have you improved this lifecycle? If not, then why? And a lot of people then stop. I was complaining, it sucked, I didn't do anything. And finally, what is the biggest decision you have ever made? So the caliber of the decisions one could do or could make in their former job. And how did you approach it? The decision itself is one thing, but also how did one approach it, also super important. Okay, the last but not least part is responsibility. So responsibility for me means making sure that the problem is solved completely. Just imagine you are responsible for your daughter or say 5-year-old daughter, and just imagine you are responsible and you told your wife or a husband, I almost delivered her to preschool. I left her just 1 kilometer from preschool. I almost did it. It's not a responsibility. Responsibility is about attention to details, really, and when details matter, and in our world, details matter a lot, because half products, so a product which is almost ready but misses, for example, an installer, it's of no use. If there is no installer, then when someone can easily install it, of no use. If someone cannot, we have everything, but you cannot log in, well, it's useless. Small detail render the system irrelevant. And generally, ownership, to give someone ownership for something requires this person to be fully responsible for that. And finally, if they are responsible, you can empower them. And empowering autonomous people, autonomous team, was a key ingredient to scale your organization. Okay, now about the data, and especially big data. And I've seen people not very responsible about how they use data. So often people forget that data, and nowadays with big data we are mostly talking about statistics, really, are the worst kind of lie if they are abused, really. And a lot of people also believe that if they have data, if they gather data, they can stop thinking and just let data decide. In fact, if the data clearly tell you what the decision should be, it's already too late. I mean, decision is always about having some options. If it's obvious, it's not a decision. And probably if you are waiting for data to show you, for example, that you are out of the business, so you have revenue of 0 last month, 0 this month, you are out of the business. If you just act because data showed you are out of the business, it's too late to make any decision. And also, a lot of people forget about the data. Dealing with data is about the science, not about the art. And let me give you a few examples. Abusing the data. I've seen it many times with people around in our company, in different companies. So just, you may be faced at some board review of one of the projects. We have phenomenal growth. We have hockey curve. You know what, last 5 months, great. If you look wider, in fact, the picture looks like this. We have the phenomenal descent here, and just some local hiccup, then again it's bad. So this is exactly the same numbers, but really where a person didn't care to look at the bigger picture. Or another, my favorite one, that's like how customers are distributed. So we have, say, 50% renewing customers, 10% we lost as a churn, and 30% of the new. And I quickly say, how about the remaining 10? It adds up only to 90. We have 100, and I didn't thought about it. How can one seriously treat such a chart then? Or extrapolation, that's also a nice place. Yesterday, 0 husbands, today, 1 husband, in 40 days, 40 husbands. That's great. Or this one, correlation versus causation. That's a, Internet Explorer, market share, and that's a number of deaths. Seriously, like Internet Explorer, the diminishing of IE helped US civilization, apparently, society. So a lot of people really are not able to distinguish correlation and causation. And the difference is very important, but it's also tricky. It's tricky because sometimes you may not know. And I will give you an example. With Atlassian, we had this situation where we saw from the data that non-English speaking countries tend to renew slower or at lower rate Atlassian products like Jira or Confluence than English-speaking countries. And one of the theory, like we look closely at the data, analyze it, one of the theory hypotheses was that maybe it's because we miss localized communication for these folks, like newsletters, reminders about renewal, how-tos, release notes, and so on, in their own language, including Poland, by the way. I was skeptical. I had different theory. My theory was that non-English countries in Europe are just poorer, and they don't renew that actively. And we decided to validate that. We could have spent millions and validate it going big, but it's usually possible to validate such hypotheses, like set the hypothesis and validate them relatively cheaply with a MVP. I would say like the minimum viable proof, not a product, to go light and see whether, say, just cover one language, cover for 3 weeks release notes in, say, Portuguese or Polish, and see whether it has any impact. It didn't, by the way. So this theory was abandoned. So please about the data. Data cannot replace thinking. Please remember about it. Use your brain. Use common sense. If a rooster in the morning crows and the temperature grows, it doesn't mean that the rooster increases the temperature in the world, right? That's not about it. And double check, cross-check your data before making any conclusions. And before going big with your data, do your data right. The last ingredient, we have 3 more minutes, is passion. Passion is an often abused word, word. Often people say how passionate they are about something, whereas in fact, really passionate people don't say about it anything, but they do. And it shows, it's obvious to everyone around that they are passionate about something. Intrinsic motivation drives passion way better than extrinsic motivation, like, say, money or job titles or some external goals. Curiosity is a great source of passion and motivation. Desire to change anything, myself, world, this room here. And passion cannot be really overrated. It's when combined with intelligence, high intellectual horsepower, with learning and responsibility, passion does amazing things. And also passion and motivations are in the interesting spiral with achievements. So when you are motivated and you achieve something, then those achievements feed back, loop back, and increase your motivation. And then you have even more higher achievements. Really perks or money here won't work that well as intrinsic motivation and achievements which motivates one best. So how to explore motivation? These are some obvious questions like why are you joining us? Or why do you want to change your current job? So leave some company. Why do you at all pursue the career of software developer? Or why do you want to learn some stuff? Or what are you passionate about and why? And the best follow-up question is, what have you done recently to cultivate this passion, really? So I would like to try to finish with the formula for awesomeness. So this is A, awesomeness. Awesomeness is proportional to intellectual horsepower. It's proportional to learning mindset. It's proportional to experience. The better, the more challenging experience, the better. It's obviously proportional to responsibility of one person and to the passion. I don't dare decide whether it's a sum or a product of these factors. What are weights or even powers? I believe that passion here should be probably squared in the formula, but your mileage may vary. It's really difficult. But all these ingredients are super important. And guess what? There is no technical skills here, because I realized that technical skills are the output, are the product of awesomeness and not the input. They don't cause the awesomeness to happen, but a person who has these traits gets skills, becomes super skillful in all these areas. So this is byproduct, really. So a few takeaways and we are done. With exponential growth of the world, of the technology, that's for sure we see now more unknowns and knowns, and honestly, looking at how artificial intelligence go, how space exploration go, and so on, nanobiology, difficult to predict what happens. Anyway, companies react by relying on individuals and empowering them to quickly adapt and scale their businesses. Otherwise, they are dead. Vertical scaling of the organization has its limits. So always, when you build a hierarchy, the person on top becomes your bottleneck. And there is no chance in modern world that the most genius person can handle several things at the same time with appropriate attention. And what Google did, for instance, a few years ago, they created a mothership company, a conglomerate called Alphabet, probably you know it. And their whole idea was, let's partition ourselves into totally independent groups where this conglomerate is just responsible for branding and providing money to make the business running, whereas all the decisions, all of them, are fully decoupled, and each of the business, like YouTube separately to Google, separately to Waze, separately to God know what, some pharmaceutical business Google is in, or self-driving cars, are making all the decisions independently to let them do it faster. And they build these businesses around smart creatives at all levels. So a CEO was a smart creative, and obviously CEO in the company of 100 person, or in a sub-company of 100 person, still has to rely on different smart creatives where he can further empower them to deal with multiple streams of work. So to quote Google founders, when they start the Alphabet, they said Alphabet is about businesses prospering through strong leaders, smart creatives, and independence, full independence, really. By the way, do you know what's the URL for, the domain name for Alphabet? That was interesting. I didn't realize. It's abc.xyz. Google especially booked the top domain for that. Interesting. So another takeaway is good versus great boss. Over time, I realized I always thought that good bosses are about delegating stuff. But delegation is an overhead. Delegation means you have to first of all, handle the request and delegate it as, a delegate pattern in software programming, in object-oriented programming, like a proxy, So, in fact, you have to handle the result as well. So it doesn't really scale. Great bosses do more. They build instead environment, and then instead of manage, they can support people and empower them fully so that they can act independently. And this is what Google tries to do. Conclusion about smart creative. I don't think that smart creatives are the only people worth hiring. Actually, it's probably impossible to have just smart creative. This whole spectrum, from an ant worker, maybe an engineer just fixing the bugs, maybe like this chief architect, 45 per week. Probably he's necessary in some place. I wouldn't call him though a chief architect. Some people who are standard knowledge worker who maybe work in support organization according to rigid processes, that's okay. There are some smart creatives who are the kernels of the sub-businesses allowing to scale are necessary. So all of them are necessary. However, what happens is that we are facing with the growing world and changing environment constantly in an exponential way, a whole force which puts us to the left. So a person who doesn't do anything, who is today a knowledge worker, tomorrow may be an end worker. And that's the problem, because what we learned yesterday may be inapplicable in a few years from now if we are not keeping up with what's happening and we don't understand the changes. When we don't constantly grow, we are not in the growth mindset, and we may wake up being on the very, very far left of this axis. So a few farewell questions to you. So think about it. Are you smart creative, or do you want to become one? And do you think you have a great mindset, or do you maybe just leverage a great talent you may have, inborn talent? Do you work on your talent? And finally, does your environment support the growth mindset? Thank you. I think I can take like 2 questions, but I'm then available in the hall. So we have microphone here. If anyone wants to ask questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I will be here packing up.